Have you ever looked in the mirror and thought, I don't even know who I am anymore? Like, you're doing all the right things, smiling at work, being the good friend, posting the highlight reel, but deep down, something feels off, like you're living a life that someone else scripted for you. I know that feeling because I lived it. I said yes to things I hated. I chased goals that weren't mine. I became what people expected and lost who I actually was. Carl Jung calls this the danger of living through persona, the fake self we create to survive in society. And if you never break out of it, you might spend your whole life being a stranger to your own soul. Part 1. The persona versus the true self. Carl Jung believed that every human being wears a mask, what he called the persona. It's a version of yourself you show to the world. The polished, curated identity shaped by what society, culture, and family have told you is acceptable. The persona is inherently fake or bad. It helps us function in daily life. But problems arise when you begin to confuse a persona with your true self. You become the charming one, the achiever, the helper, the tough one, not because that's who you really are, but because that's who you learn to be in order to gain approval or avoid rejection. Over time, that mask becomes so convincing, even you start to believe it. You start living your life for image, not for meaning. For example, maybe you're known as a confident friend, always giving advice, but secretly, you're exhausted, uncertain, and desperate for someone to just ask how you're really doing. Jung warned that the longer you live to your persona, the more you disconnect from your authentic self, the deeper, more complex identity buried in your unconscious. This true self holds your raw emotions, creativity, desires, fears, and purpose. And the journey of individuation, as Jung called it, begins the moment you stop performing and start listening to the voice inside you that isn't trying to impress anyone. When you begin to remove the mask, you don't lose yourself. You finally begin to find yourself. But why does the true self get buried in the first place? According to Jung, it's because the world teaches us, often from a very young age, that certain parts of who we are unacceptable. Maybe we're too sensitive, too loud, too curious, too emotional, too different. So you learn to suppress those parts, not out of malice or weakness, but as a survival strategy. You molded yourself to fit in, to be praised, to avoid conflict. And each time you silence a piece of your authentic self, that part didn't disappear. It simply sank into what Jung called a shadow, the unconscious region of the psyche where all our hidden traits live. Over time, we become strangers to our own desires. We chase careers that look good on paper, relationships that look good on Instagram, lifestyles that keep us safely in line with the crowd, while our deeper needs remain unmet and unexplored. Jung believed that true healing doesn't come from self-improvement in the traditional sense, but from self-recovery, from integrating what we've denied, repressed, or forgotten. The work is subtle, slow, and often uncomfortable. It means asking hard questions like, what do I want when no one's watching? What am I pretending not to feel? Whose approval am I still chasing? This journey isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And in that remembering, there's a kind of quiet power, not loud, not performative, but real. And that kind of authenticity is what Jung called the gateway to the soul. Part 2. Individuation, the journey back to yourself. Carl Jung described individuation as the central process of human development, the gradual, lifelong journey of becoming the person you were uniquely created to be. But unlike the modern idea of finding yourself through travel or aesthetics, individuation is not about creating a new identity. It's about integrating the one you've always had. It's a reconciliation of all the fragmented parts of your psyche, your persona, your shadow, your inner child, your masculine and feminine energies, your instincts, your ideals. Think of it as a return home, not to the version of you that was shaped by pressure or performance, but to the unfiltered self that existed before the world interfered. Individuation doesn't mean rejecting society or living in isolation. Rather, it means stepping into society as a whole and conscious individual, not someone blindly reacting, but someone rooted in inner truth. This process often begins with a crisis, a sense of discontent, depression, or feeling lost. Jung believed these moments weren't signs of failure, but invitations, the soul's way of saying, it's time to go deeper. And so the work begins, questioning long-held beliefs, confronting the shadow, listening to dreams, finding meaning in symbols and synchronicities. As you do this, something strange and beautiful happens. The need for external validation begins to fade. You stop living through other people's eyes. You develop what Jung called a relationship with the self, the deeper, wiser presence within you that's always been there, quietly guiding. Individuation is not a destination. It's a rhythm, a movement toward wholeness. And perhaps the most powerful realization of all is this. The path to becoming who you are is not in doing more, but in remembering more and daring to live from that place. But this journey toward wholeness is not easy. In fact, it's often the most difficult path you can take because it requires you to turn inward to confront everything you've buried, avoided, or fear becoming. As Jung wrote, there's no coming to consciousness without pain. Most people avoid this work because it threatens the very identity they spent years constructing. It asks you to trade comfort for authenticity and certainty for truth. But those who dare to face the darkness within often find a light they never knew existed. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos, the inner conflict, the doubts, the buried dreams, is not a flaw in your design. It's a signal, a call to integrate, not to run. Joseph Campbell, who built upon Jung's ideas, called this the hero's journey, the call to leave the ordinary world, face the unknown, and return transformed. But here's the twist. Unlike the movies, the dragon you're meant to slay isn't out there. It lives inside you. It's your fear of not being enough, your shame, your need to be liked. The moment you face it, you reclaim the parts of yourself you've lost. And perhaps this is what true freedom is. Not the absence of responsibility, but the ability to walk through the world unmasked, unashamed, and fully aware of who you are. Jung put it best when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." It is not a privilege granted to a chosen few. It is offered to anyone willing to walk the narrow path back to themselves. It begins in silence, in stillness, in the willingness to ask, what have I abandoned in order to be accepted? And am I ready to retrieve it? But this journey toward wholeness is not easy. In fact, it's often the most difficult path you can take because it requires you to turn inward to confront everything you've buried, avoided, or fear becoming. As Jung wrote, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Most people avoid this work because it threatens the very identity they've spent years constructing. It asks you to trade comfort for authenticity and certainty for truth. But those who dare to face the darkness within often find a light they never knew existed. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos, the inner conflict, the doubts, the buried dreams, is not a flaw in your design. It's a signal, a call to integrate, not to run. Joseph Campbell, who built upon Jung's ideas, called this the hero's journey, the call to leave the ordinary world, face the unknown, and return transformed. But here's the twist. Unlike the movies, the dragon you're meant to slay isn't out there. It lives inside you. It's your fear of not being enough, your shame, your need to be liked. The moment you face it, you reclaim the parts of yourself you've lost. And perhaps this is what true freedom is, not the absence of responsibility, but the ability to walk through the world unmasked, unashamed, and fully aware of who you are. Jung put it best when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." It is not a privilege granted to a chosen few. It is offered to anyone willing to walk the narrow path back to themselves. It begins in silence, in stillness, in the willingness to ask, what have I abandoned in order to be accepted? And am I ready to retrieve it? Part 3. Living for others is a quiet death. There is a unique kind of death that rarely makes noise. It doesn't come with scream or collapse, but with a slow erosion of the soul. Carl Jung alluded to this when he observed how many people live their lives not as themselves, but as projections of who others want them to be. This is what it means to live for others, not out of love or duty, but out of fear. Fear of being misunderstood, disliked, or unloved. And the danger lies in how socially acceptable this death is. You become the version of yourself that's easiest to digest, the agreeable son, the high-achieving daughter, the reliable friend, the quiet partner. Day after day, you trade authenticity for acceptance until one morning you wake up and the person staring back at you in the mirror is a stranger. As Eleanor Roosevelt once said, when you adopt the standards and the values of someone else, you surrender your own integrity. You become, to the extent of your surrender, less of a human being. And yet, we do it all the time. We chase careers we don't care about just to be admired. We smile through discomfort just to keep the peace. We say yes when everything inside us is screaming no. Jung believed that this kind of life, though outwardly successful, is internally hollow. He warned that a person who does not follow the voice of their own soul will eventually feel disconnected, anxious, and unreal because they are in fact living someone else's life. The philosopher Seneca once wrote, "How long will you wait before you demand the best for yourself?" That question isn't about greed or selfishness. It's about courage. The courage to disappoint others in order to stay true to yourself. The courage to stand alone, if it means standing in truth. because the cost of living for others isn't just your dreams, it's your identity. And the longer you wait to reclaim it, the quieter your inner voice becomes, until eventually it stops speaking at all. You might not even realize it's happening, because living for others often wears a noble disguise. It looks like being responsible, like being selfless, like being the strong one. But beneath the surface, you start to feel it. The dull ache of unspoken dreams, the quiet resentment that builds each time you betray your own boundaries, the haunting question that surfaces late at night. Is this really my life? And still, you keep performing because you've been taught that pleasing others is virtuous, even if it costs you yourself. But Jung reminds us that there is no virtue in self-betrayal. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, he wrote, and that terror is why so many avoid it. It's safer to hide behind roles and expectations than to risk being misunderstood for who you truly are. But safety is not the same as peace. You may be applauded by the world, and yet feel profoundly alone inside your own skin. Anais Nin once said, "Had I not created my whole world, I would certainly have died in other people's." That's the quiet tragedy Jung warns us of. When you let others define your world, you lose the right to inhabit your own soul. And make no mistake, it doesn't always happen in dramatic moments. Sometimes it's in the smallest compromises, laughing at a joke you didn't find funny, nodding in agreement when your heart says no, downplaying your passion so you don't make others uncomfortable. Each time you silence yourself to maintain the peace around you, you disturb the peace within you, until one day, the longing to be seen, not for your role, but for your truth, becomes unbearable. That's when the journey begins. Not to become someone else, but to recover what you lost in the process of being enough for everyone else. Because the soul is not something you can trade in exchange for approval. It's the price you pay when you don't live for yourself. Part 4. Disobeying the herd. To disobey the herd is to risk everything: comfort, approval, familiarity. But Carl Jung believed that true growth begins the moment you stop outsourcing your decisions to the crowd. The herd, as he called it, isn't just society. It's every invisible script you've inherited about what's acceptable, admirable, or safe. It's the pressure to follow trends you don't believe in, to adopt opinions you haven't questioned, to pursue a life that looks good from the outside but feels hollow on the inside. The courage to step away from all of that, to risk being different, disliked, or misunderstood, is rare, but it is necessary. As Jung wrote, a man who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them. That inferno often begins when you say, no more pretending, no more people-pleasing, no more quiet compliance with values that don't align with your soul. But the moment you step outside the herd, you will feel it. The chill of loneliness, the sting of judgment, the fear of being wrong. That's the test. Because most people don't actually want freedom. They want validation. And if you live for validation, you will forever be a slave to the group. Think of historical and modern examples. Socrates drank poison for asking questions that disturbed the herd. Jesus was crucified not for being evil, but for challenging the norms of religious and political power. Even in everyday life, the friend who leaves a toxic relationship, the artist who breaks away from commercial trends, the teen who refuses to bully others just to fit in, all of them are rebels in their own right. As Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Disobedience, in this sense, is not about rebellion for its own sake. It's about reclaiming authorship over your life. It's choosing truth over popularity, alignment over applause. And while that road is narrow and often steep, it's also sacred because it leads you back to something the herd can never give you, yourself. And yet, even knowing all this, the temptation to return to the herd will haunt you. There's a deep human instinct to belong, to be seen and accepted. It's wired into your biology. But Jung makes a profound distinction. Belonging should never come at the cost of becoming. When you trade your individuality for group approval, you don't just lose your voice, you lose your orientation in life. You begin to navigate by someone else's compass. And after enough time, you forget what your own true north even looks like. This is why many people feel a gnawing emptiness, even when they seem to have it all. A good job, a social circle, a curated online presence. It's not that their lives are objectively wrong. It's that they're not theirs. The courage to disobey the herd, then, is not just about saying no to the world. It's about saying yes to your own inner authority. It's quiet at first. It might sound like a decision to change majors, to leave a job, to speak the truth no one wants to hear, or to simply say, I don't agree. These acts seem small, but they are the beginning of everything. As psychologist Viktor Frankl once said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. You might lose people along the way. You might lose approval, comfort, even clarity for a time. But you will gain something far more valuable: integrity, the sense that your life, with all its flaws and failures, belongs to you. And once you've tasted that kind of inner alignment, the herd begins to feel less like safety and more like a cage. Conclusion: so much of what we call life is, in truth, a long negotiation between who we are and who the world tells us to be. We build a persona, an acceptable version of ourselves, to survive, to be loved, to be approved of. But behind that mask lives something far more real, the true self, waiting patiently beneath the noise. And at some point, if we're honest, we begin to feel the tension, the disconnect. We sense that we're performing and that the role is wearing thin. That's where the journey of individuation begins, not in self-improvement, but in self-recovery, in remembering what we abandoned in exchange for belonging. But this path is not walk without pain, because living for others, even with the best intentions, eventually silences the voice within. It's a quiet death that feels like anxiety, fatigue, restlessness, symptoms not of failing life, but of a forgotten self. And to reclaim it, you will have to do the most radical thing a person can do in a conformist world: disobey. You will have to say no to the herd, to the pressure, to the unspoken scripts. You will have to walk alone, maybe even misunderstood. But in that aloneness, something sacred is born, a self that no longer bends a fit, but stands to speak. And in that moment, life ceases to be a performance. It becomes a revelation. So ask yourself, with brutal honesty and quiet courage, are you living your life or the life that was chosen for you? Because the difference between the two is everything.